Over the next 2 hours, we'll build a minimalistic social media app together. It includes a register page where users can sign up, the ability to log out, and of course log back in with their email and password. Once logged in, users can create new posts, which will all be displayed on the homepage. If a user only wants to see their own posts, they can do that on their profile page. We'll use React for the front end and Firebase for the back end. Along the way, you'll learn everything from state management and handling events to authentication, form submissions, fetching data, and more. So let's get started. To get started, we need to create a new project. So let's right-click our desktop, open terminal, and now we're going to type in npm create read at latest followed by the name of our project. Let's say this is going to be a social-app, but of course the name is up to you. We're going to choose React as a framework. Let's select JavaScript, no, yes, and now we're going to wait for the installation to finish. So now the project has been created, so we can close the terminal. And this right here is our project. So let's open Visual Studio Code. Now we have to open that folder, so let's go to File, Open Folder, and let's select social-app. So let's select this folder. And right now we've just opened Visual Studio Code within this folder. To get started, let's go to our source folder and let's delete our app.jsx as well as our app.css because we will not need those files anymore. Let's remove everything from our index.css and just create some basic styles, or in fact reset the basic styles. So margin will be 0, padding will be 0, and box sizing will be border box for our entire document. For this entire page, we will have 5 pages. So let's, instead of our source folder, create a pages folder. And instead of this pages folder, let's create a home page. So home.jsx. Let's create an add post page.jsx, a profile.jsx, as well as a register.jsx and a login.jsx. Let's create a basic template for every single page. So const add post is going to be equal to this arrow function that is just going to return a div for now. Export default add post. And now we can just copy this template and paste it in right here, right here, right here, and right here. And now we only have to rename the component. So this here has to be register, and now we can also export a register. Let's save that one. We have profile right here, so let's export profile. Same goes for login and for home as well. So now we should have all of those pages. So we created a post, a home, a login, a profile, and a register page. But at this point, we cannot access those pages because we do not provide those pages yet. So we need to create a browser router that allows us to access all of those pages. So within our main.jsx, let's remove our app. Let's also remove the import because we do not have that page anymore. And now we need to create a router that provides or defines all of our routes. In order to create a router, we first need to create a new terminal. So new terminal right here. I need a command prompt. So I'm going to select command prompt. I'm going to use npm I followed by react router DOM, which is the package name, to install react router DOM. Once installed, let's define a router. So const router is going to be equal to create browser router from react router DOM. So we are going to import that one. And this create browser router function expects an array. Instead of this array, we have to define all of the routes. So we need to define all of the routes within an object for every single route. So the first object will include all of the information for our first route. We will access this route by just using a slash, so by just using the normal URL. Element is going to be our home page, so let's import home from ./pages/home. Now the second route will be /register, for example. The element will be our register page, like so. The third one will have a path of /login, and the element will be the login page. Now we also need add post and profile, so path /profile element is going to be our profile page, and for the last one, let's have a path of add -post, for example. Element is going to be add post, like so. So now we defined all of the routes, but we are not able to use them yet because we did not provide those routes. So we need a router provider. We can import this router provider from React router DOM right here. So let's import that one. So imported that one right here as well. And this is a self-closing tag and only expects a router property. And this router, or to this router property, will pass our router that provides all of the routes or defines all of the routes. So now that we defined all of the routes, let's just use npm run dev to start our development server. Let's open that development server. And now you can see that we're just having this page. And let me maybe on the home page just output home so we in fact see that this works. So you can see we're having home right here. Now for our add post page, let me, for example, have add post as a text right here. And now I'm going to access add minus post. And you can see that this in fact works. We can also go to /register and we will probably not see anything because we did not output anything there yet. But it also seems to work, as you can see. Let's start by creating a couple of variables first of all. So instead of our index.css, I want to create a couple of global variables that we can use for all of our other files later on, for all of our other CSS files later on. So I'm first of all going to create a primary minus color. I'm going to define black, but I'm actually going to use a slightly lighter version of black, like so. And this will be the color that I'm going to use for pretty much anything within this video. Let's start by creating our register.jsx file, or component to be precise. And inside of this component, I want to have a couple of input fields, a register button, and the option to switch to our login page. So first of all, I'm going to create a components folder to keep track of all of our components. And the first component that I want to create is going to be our input.jsx. So const input is going to be equal to an arrow function. And we're just going to return an input for now. The type right now is text, but I actually want to dynamically set the type. So we have to accept the type as a prop. And I'm going to say that this type will be accepted right here. So type is equal to whatever type we pass as a prop. Now it might also make sense to accept a placeholder as a prop. So we need to say that we're getting that one right here as well. And we also want to get a value and a set value function. And value for this input field is going to be equal to our value, and onChange is going to get an event and will call a set value function with e.target.value. So with whatever value the user has entered. And you will understand this in a second. So we will pass this value and this set value function to every single input field, but this value and set value will of course differ depending on the value that we pass. So maybe one value will be responsible for the email, the other value will be responsible for the username, and the last value will be responsible for the password, for example. And set value is just the name that we use for example, set email, set username, and set password. So this is just a placeholder function that will later on be replaced with set email, for example, or set username. And then we're going to call set username or set email with our e.target.value. So let me show you. Now instead of our register.jsx, I can just get this input right here, which I also have to export. So export default input. Let me save that one, and now I should be able to import that one from /components/import, like so. But I need to pass a couple of properties. So type, placeholder, value, and set value. So type is going to be equal to email for the first field. Placeholder is going to be equal to email for this one, and actually this here needs to be a small e. And value and set value needs to be equal to a state. So const email set email is going to be equal to use state. We're going to initialize our email with an empty string, and as a value we'll now pass email for our email input field, and for the setter function we are going to pass set email for now. Let me save this one, and now you can see that we're having this email field right here. Let's also create an input for our username. So input, again we need a type. Type is going to be equal to text in this case, because this is a plain text field. Placeholder is going to be username. Value is going to be equal to a value, and set value is going to be equal to a set value function. So let me also create something for username, or a state for username. So username, set username, is going to be equal to useState. We're going to initialize with an empty value, and the same goes for password. So password and set password is going to be equal to useState, and we're going to initialize with an empty string as well. And now we just need to pass our username as a value right here, and as a setter function we need to pass set username. Now we can just duplicate this field because we need one more for the password, and type of this one is going to be password because the type of this input field should be password. Placeholder should be password, value should be password, and set value should be set password. So now we're passing set password, set username, and set email to the set value function right here, and we are later on calling the set value function with e.target.value. So essentially, since we are replacing set value with set email, set username, and set password, we are therefore calling set username with e.target.value, set email with e.target.value, and set password with e.target.value. So essentially, it is the same as using a normal input field on this page right here, but it's more reusable. So let's save this one. Let's save this one. Now we should have all of those fields right here. And now I also want to create a component that allows us to switch to our login form in case we already have an account, or to switch to our register form in case we do not have an account yet. So I'm just going to create a new component that has the name change.jsx. Probably not the best name, but let's just go with that one. So const change is going to be equal to this arrow function. I'm going to return a div export default change. And now I want to render this change component right below my input fields. So change like so. I'm going to import that one. It's going to be a self-closing tag. I'm going to pass a text right here. This is going to be equal to already have an account, question mark. And the link text is going to be equal to login, for example. And now we need to have a link, and this is going to be equal to /login because I want to redirect the user to /login. And now within our change.jsx component, I need to accept text, link text, and link as a prop. So text, link text, and link right here. We're going to receive those ones as a prop. And now I want to render all of this within this component. So first of all, I have a paragraph. Instead of this paragraph, I want to output our text like so. Right below this paragraph, I want to have the link that I'm going to import from React Router DOM. Instead of this link, I want to have a text that is equal to the link text like so. And I want to redirect the user to whatever we passed as a link right here. Let's take a look at the page. So you can see this is how this looks like. If I'm now going to press login, we're getting redirected to the login page because that was the path that we have defined. And now I can reuse this component later on for our login page, for example, as well. Now let me also create a button that we can use to register. So a register button. But let's use a component again that we can reuse later on. So button.jsx const button is going to be equal to this arrow function. We're going to return a button, so just a normal button, and I'm going to export, so export default button like so. Within this button, I want to expect a text that we get as a prop later on. So I'm going to say I'll expect this text as a prop. I'm going to output this text within our button field, and on click, I also want to do something. What do I want to do? We'll pass the function later on as well. So I'm just going to say that I'll expect a property that has the name on click, so a prop. So now when using the button within our register.jsx, for example, we have to pass those props right here. So we have to pass a text prop that is going to be equal to register in our case, for example. And on change, we are expecting a function that can be handle register, for example. We don't have this function yet, so we need to create that one. So const handle register is going to be equal to this arrow function right here. And now you can see that we're having this button right now. Right above all of this, I would like to have a text that, for example, says register now with a little bit of text right below. So let's create that one as a component as well, because we might again use that one on the login page as well. So I'm going to create a heading.jsx const heading is going to be equal to an arrow function that is going to return a div export default heading like so. And now I want to output this heading right above our input field. So heading like so. As a prop to this heading, we will have a heading text that is going to be equal to register now, for example, and a normal text that will, for example, say start using this cool app now. So now we need to expect those ones as props within our heading.jsx. So we're going to get heading text and our normal text. So now within this div, we will have an h1, and inside of this h1, we will output our heading text. So heading text like so. And right below, we will have a paragraph. And inside of this paragraph, we will just output our normal text. And as you can see, we're getting this result right now. But obviously, the styling is absolutely terrible. So let's start to style everything step by step. Let's start by styling the heading first. So we're going to create a CSS folder. Instead of the CSS folder, let's have a heading.module.css. So this module will define the styles only for our heading.jsx. And we can access those styles within a styles object. So we can say import styles, which is going to be an object from /css/heading.module.css. So this styles object will now hold all of the classes that we define within this heading.module.css, and we can access all of the classes by using the dot notation. So by saying, for example, class name is equal to styles.container. So now we need to create a .container class to really make this accessible within our styles object, like so. And now this should work. And actually, in our case, I also want to have a class for our heading. So I'm going to say class name styles.heading. And for our paragraph, I'm going to say class name styles.text. I'm going to target .heading as well. .heading will have a color of var, and I want to use our primary color. So this should now have a different color, even though the difference is only subtle. And now I'm also going to target .text, and this one will have a color, and I'm going to use gray for now. So we're getting this gray text right here. But I think it would be pretty nice if it would be slightly brighter, like so. And now I want to use for the entire app a different font family. If we want to define global styles, we should always do that within the file that we import within our main.jsx. What kind of file do we import right here? What kind of CSS file do we import right here? Our index.css. So that is our global file. So within our global file, within our body, I'm going to say that I want to use the font family of system UI. So this should change the font for everything right now. And as you can see, it does. And for the font size, I'm going to say that I want to use a font size of 1.8 rem, for example. So this is the effect that we're getting right now. The entire .container class will have a text align of center. So this here is centered right now. And I want to have a little bit more spacing to the top for our text. So margin, top of maybe 10 pixels. So this is the effect. And I think this looks pretty much all right to me. Now let's also start to style our input fields. So we need to create a new CSS file that has the name input, for example, .module.css. Let's import that module within our input field. So first of all, let's close this. And within our input component, let's say we're going to import styles from /css/input.module.css. And let's give our input a class name of styles.input, for example. We're going to define this class within our input module, so .input will have a width of 100%. So 100% of the container size, essentially. It will always take up the width that the container allows it to take up. A padding of 10 pixels into every single direction. Let's use a border radius of 5 pixels. An outline of none. And I think this should already look pretty much alright. Well, the border looks pretty terrible, so let's use border, 1 pixel, solid. And I'm actually going to use RGBA of 0, 0, 0, 0.4. So a form of gray, essentially. And this is the effect that we're getting right now. Next up, we need to define the styles for this change component. So within our change.jsx, let's import a style sheet as well. But first of all, we need to create a style sheet. So let's create change.module.css. Let's import those ones. So import styles from /css/change.module.css. For this div, let's create a styles.container class that will just create a display of flags, so those items are next to each other, and maybe a gap of 4 pixels. So we have a little bit of gap between those items. So this is the effect that we're getting. And I want to use align items of center just to make sure that those items are centered. I want this login right here to be bold, and I don't want to have this underline. So I'm going to create another class for this link that will have the class name styles.link, for example. Doesn't matter too much though. And .link will have a text decoration of none and a font weight of bold and a color of var primary color. So now we're getting this effect. And once we click this button, we will get redirected to login. So this works. I also want to have this center aligned. So I'm going to say for container, text align center. Next up, I want to style the register button. So let's create a button class as well. So button.module.css. We need to import that one within our button.jsx. So let's say import styles from /css/button.module.css, and our button will get a class name of styles.btn. Button.module.css will be targeted with the .button class. We will have a width of 100%, a padding top bottom of maybe 10 pixels, left right 0 doesn't really matter because width is 100% anyways. So you can see this is the effect. I want to have a border of 0, a border radius of 5 pixels, a cursor of pointer, a background. I'm going to use var of primary color, and this should actually do the job. As you can see, the color should be white though, so the text color within this button. And this is what the button should look like. And I know at this point this here looks absolutely terrible, but we can fix that. We now created all of the styles for all of the individual components. But to really fix all of the rest, we need to create the styles for this entire page. So let me show you, because I think this is a little bit easier. I'm just going to close all of those things because we will not need them anymore. And now on our register page, we also need to create some styles. So we need to create a style shield for register as well. And we need to import that one. So we'll import styles from /css/register.module.css. And now, first of all, let's use a class name of styles.container for this entire page. So .container will have a width of 100% and a height of 100 viewport height. So this container will essentially take up all of the available space on this page. But now I want to center all of the items right here, so in the center of the page. How could I actually do that? I can use another container within this container right here. So I wrap everything within another container. And this right here is going to be our subcontainer. So styles.subcontainer. And now I'm going to get this subcontainer. So .subcontainer. I'm going to say that the width is going to be 90%. And margin is going to be auto. So this subcontainer will be centered. As you can see, this is how this looks. And this is especially important if you use a small device, for example. So you could also say 80%, for example, or 70% might look a little bit better. So on small devices, this is what this will look like. But on a big device, I think this is still way too wide. So I'm going to define a max width as well of maybe 500 pixels. And now we're getting this effect right here. And I think actually 400 would be even better. So why do I use width and max width? I use a width of 90% because this means on a small device, it will take up 70% of the available space. And on a big device, even if it could take up 70% of the available space, it will only take up a max of 400 pixels. So this makes this responsive by default. So now I want to center everything. So I'm going to say display flex justify content center align item center for the container class. And this will center the child. And the child in our case is our subcontainer. And therefore the subcontainer will be centered in the middle of our page. For this entire container, I'll also say text align of center to center align everything. Now let's get those form elements into a container as well. So we can style them as well. So right here for the input fields, I'm going to create another container. And this container will have a class name of styles.form container, for example, I'm going to say .form container will also have a display of flex, but a flex direction of column. And now I can use a gap of 10 pixels to create a gap between those flex items right here. And maybe I'm only going to use 8 pixels in that case. So this is the effect. Now I want to have a little bit of margin to the top and to the bottom for this change container. So I'm going to say, I'll place this change container inside of a div. This div will have a class name of styles.change container. I'm going to target this change container. I say the width is going to be 100%, display flex, and justify content of center, like so. So now we're getting this effect. But I also want to have a margin top of 5 pixels and a margin bottom of maybe 10 pixels. So this is the effect that we're seeing right now, and I think this looks pretty good already. We could also have a little bit of margin top for our input container or form container. So margin top 30 pixels. So this right now is the input field that we're getting. And maybe this here has a little bit too much margin. So for our heading.module.css, let's say margin top of 5 pixels, like so. So now that we've finished our register.jsx, we can also start to create our login.jsx. And that one is actually really, really similar. So let's just close that one, and that one, and let's only open our login.jsx. And actually, we could just copy a lot of this right here, but I'm actually going to type it out so you just see it once again. So for our login page, we only need the email and the password. So I'm going to say const email set email is going to be equal to use state. We're going to initialize with an empty string. Const password set password is going to be equal to use state, and let's just use an empty string. For the styles, I'm also going to use the register styles because they are pretty much the same. So I'm going to import styles from /css/register.module.css. Let's take a look at our register page. So right here we have the container, then we have the heading, a couple of inputs, and so on. So let's first of all create a container that has the class name styles.container as well. So this div can have class name of styles.container. So this will tell our login page that it should take up all of the available space, so 100%. Let's go to our login page. Right inside of this container, we previously had a subcontainer that tells this input field to only take up 400 pixels, I think was what we've defined. So I'm just going to copy this class name right here. This is the form container. And I'm going to create a div. And I'm just going to copy this line right here, so the subcontainer. And I'm going to create another div that has the class name, or actually I'm just going to paste it in. So class name styles of subcontainer. And inside of the subcontainer, we now had this heading that previously said register, but in our case, it should probably now say login now and whatever. So we'll think about that in a second. So I'm just going to get this header and I'm going, or heading, and I'm just going to re-import that one from /components/heading. And now instead of using the headings text, I can say login now. And instead of this text, I'm going to say, welcome back, enjoy your stay, like so, for example. So now we're having this heading right here. Right below this heading, it might make sense to have a couple of input fields. So again, we had those input fields inside of this div that has a class name of styles.form container. So let's just create another div right below that has a class name of styles.form container, like so. Instead of this form container, let's also use our input that we'll import from components/input. And this input needs a couple of properties. So type, placeholder, value, and set value. So again, let's say the type of this input is email because this is an email input, placeholder, email, value, email, set value, set email. And now we need the same for our password. So input, type, password, placeholder, password, value, password, set value, set password, like so. And now this should work. Let's take a look at the page. So we have email and password right here. Right below, we should have the change component, if I remember correctly. And this change component is within a change container div. So let me just copy this change component. Let's create another div right below this form container. Oops, my bad. So div right here. Instead of this div, we're going to have change. Let's re-import change from /component/change. And this one needs to link to our register page. The link text should be register. And the text should be don't have an account yet. And this wrapper for the change component has a class name of styles.changeContainer. So we can just copy and paste that one in here as well. So you see, this is the effect. And now we only need the button. So we can just right below the change container, create a button. So we could just use this button right here. So button like so, we'll import that one. Text is going to be login, for example. And on click, we want to have handle login, or we want to execute the function handle login. So we don't have this function yet. So let's create that one. So const handle login is going to be an empty arrow function for now. And this is all that we actually need to create a login form. So we can now press register, get to the register page, login, get to the login page. And it's as simple as that once you have all of the components set up to create multiple pages. Now that all of this is set up, we should work on the functionality, so on the logic. First of all, we should be able to create a user. So we need Firebase in order to do that. And then we should be able to log in. And we, of course, also need Firebase for that. So let's search for Firebase Google, for example, or Google Firebase. Let's go to the Firebase web page. And first of all, if you are already logged in, you can just go to the console. Otherwise, you first have to log in. But I'm already logged in, so I'm going to go to the console. I'm going to press create a new Firebase project. The project name will, for example, be social-app. That's up to you though. I'm going to use social-app. I'm going to press continue. I'm going to enable Gemini in Firebase, but that's not really important. So feel free to choose whatever you like right here. Let's press continue. I would recommend you to disable Google Analytics if you do not want to push this to production. And since we're just testing at this point, I would recommend you to disable this because this makes it a little bit faster to set up the entire project. Now we're waiting for this entire setup process to finish. Once done, we can press continue like so. And now, first of all, we need authentication because we want to enable registration, login, and so on. And in order to do so, and in order to keep track of the user, we need authentication. So let's go to build. Let's enable authentication by going to authentication. Press get started to get started. We want to allow a login by using email and password. So we have to select email and password over here. We're going to enable it. You can also enable email link, passwordless sign in, but I would prefer to only allow the user to log in by using email and password. So let's save that one. Now that should be enabled. Now we need to add Firebase to our project. We can do so by going to project overview. Right here we need to add an app. So let's press add app. We want to add a web app. So let's press web app. We need to give our app a name. In our case, that name doesn't really matter, but let's use social app as well. I'm going to register the app like so. Now we also need to install Firebase, which we'll also see in a couple of seconds once we get to step number 2. So as you can see, first of all, we should npm install Firebase to install Firebase. We can do that in the console by using a new command prompt. Let's paste that in here. And while this finishes, so this will take a short time, we can already go on to step number 2, which is copying this code right here and pasting that code into a file. And I'm always going to create a firebase.js file within my source folder. So firebase.js, and I just paste the code in here. And then I also remove the comments because they are kind of distracting in my opinion. A lot of people will tell you that you somehow need to store those API keys securely and so on, and maybe get them into a .dnv file and so on. But in fact, Google even states themselves that those values right here do not need to be protected. Those ones are meant to be public, and there's no security risk in having those values right here public, because those values right here are not meant to secure your app. What is really meant to secure your app is going to be the rules file that you will see in a second. Now Firebase is installed, so we can first of all create an auth instance. So const auth is going to be equal to get auth which we have to import from Firebase/auth, so from that package. But you can see that the auto import oftentimes does not work, so we have to import it manually by saying import get auth from Firebase/auth. So now this works. And this get auth function expects us to pass the app right here, and the app just defines basically the basic configurations. So API key, auth domain, project ID, and so on. So all of the stuff that our app needs to know to connect to the proper project right here. So do the proper authentication service, database, and so on later on. So essentially this here is the configuration. We initialize an app object by using this configuration, and later on we just pass this app object when initializing authentication, databases, and so on. And for now, I'm also going to export const auth. So I want to use this auth object somewhere else as well. So now we need to create the function, so the register function. I'll have this entire function within a try catch block because, of course, since we're working with a database, there can also occur an error, and I want to catch this error in case I'm getting an error. I just want to log that one for now. I'm also going to do a basic check if we do not have an email, or we do not have a username, or we do not have a password, then we're just going to return in our case. So then we're not going to do anything. So we need email, username, and password to properly register. And now we can just use await create user with email and password. As you can see, this function or this method will be provided by Firebase/auth. So we need to import that one from Firebase/auth. And that one expects a couple of arguments now. The first one is this auth instance that we've exported previously. So we need to import that one and use it right here. So we imported that one from /Firebase, which is this file right here. And the second argument is going to be our email. And the third one is going to be our password. So let me save that one. And this entire function, of course, needs to be asynchronous because this create user with email and password needs to be awaited. Why does it need to be awaited? The reason for this is that, of course, it takes a couple of milliseconds until this request is done. So you first say, I want to create this user, then the database replies and says, okay, this is fine. And of course, this takes a short time, so we need to wait this one. Since we need to wait this one, this needs to be marked as asynchronous, this function. And now we're just going to say const user is going to be equal to whatever this function right here returns. And I can already tell you this right here will return something. Once this works, let's just console.log the user. So now whenever the user clicks on this submit button, so this register button, we're going to call the handle register function. Actually, I said on change right here. I'm not sure whether this is right. So button expects on click, to be honest. So I'm going to say on click right here. And for login, okay, for login, this was correct. So yeah, this here needs to be on click. On click, we're going to call handle register. If we are clicking, we are first checking whether we have an email, a username, and a password. If we have a username, email, and password, then we're going to create a user with our email and password. And then we're just going to console.log whatever Firebase returns. So let's take a look at that. Let me go to inspect, register. Let me just enter an email, a username, and a password. Let's go to the console, register. And you can see we're getting, after a long time, those user credentials. So this user credentials object includes a user. So we can also say that this here is user cred. And now I can, for example, access user cred.user, for example. So let me try that again. Let me change the email slightly. And now you can see that we are getting this right here. So user credentials.user includes our email, a UID, and so on. So a lot of stuff. And if we go to our database again and we go to authentication, you can see that we should now have two users because we created two users. So what can we do with our UID right now? So we are getting this .uid. Let me show you. Let me create another user. So that one. And you can see that we're getting this ID. Now we can use this ID to create a document within a database, which we are going to create in a second. And this document will have the user ID as a name. So we can uniquely identify every user who registers by using his UID. And this UID will therefore also connect authentication with your database. because the document name and the user ID stored within authentication and the database will be the exact same. But let me just show you this a little bit easier. So Firestore database, we're going to create a new database right here. So here will be a button, create database in a second. We're going to click that one. We're going to start with the standard edition. So next, select the region that is close to your current location or to the user's current location if you work with a production environment. In my case, I'm going to choose Europe. Next, I'm going to start in test mode. I'm going to create that one. This might take a couple of seconds. Now that we've created our database, you can also see this rules tab. And this is the tab that is actually responsible for making your database secure. And if you really want to get this to production, those rules should obviously be a lot more complex. But if you just want to test this and try it a little bit, you can just say allow read, write true, or if true to be precise. So you can always write and read from the database. So for testing, this is perfect. But again, if you really want to have a secure application and you want to push this and allow other people to use your app, then those rules need to make sure that your app is secure. You do not secure your app by using this firebase.js file or getting those configuration settings into a hidden environment file. This will not secure your app in any way. You will and you have to secure your app by using proper Firebase rules. So by using those rules, and your app is only as secure as those rules. So this is really, really important because a lot of tutorials will show you to store those properties within environment variables and then it's somehow more secure, but that's not the case. That does not improve the security of your app. The only thing that improves the security of your app when using Firebase is this rules file right here. Nevertheless, let's go ahead and within our register.jsx, let's say after creating this user within our authentication service, we also want to store some additional data for every user within the database. So for example, his email, his username. And if you think about a game, for example, maybe you also want to have things like his money, enemies, and so on. Friends, all of this is possible. So all of this should be stored within the database. So if you log in, for example, authentication checks whether your credentials are correct, so email and password, for example. And then you want to get the given data for the corresponding user that just logged in. And this data will be stored within the database. So within this database. So let's go to data, for example. And now to store data within the database, we first have to create a reference that references the collection where we want to store our data. So let's say this is going to be our user ref. We're going to store our data within a document. So doc, we need to import that one. So import doc from Firebase/Firestore, like so. So now we are getting this doc. This document expects a couple of arguments. So the first one is the database where we want to store it. We did not define our database yet. So let's export const db. We need to initialize the connection to our database by using get firestore. And we need to pass our app as well right here. So this right here will create the connection to our database or will define the path to our database to be precise. So first of all, we need to say db, we need to import that one from /Firebase again. As a second argument, we need to define a path, so the name of our collection essentially. We can choose pretty much any path, but in our case, users might make sense, and this is also a convention. If you want to store your users, you usually have /users, and actually we need to remove the slash. So if you want to store your users, you usually have the name users. If you want to store some posts, you usually have the collection name posts and so on, because this is just intuitive and makes pretty much sense, I would say. So after the collection name, we can also define a document name. And as I already mentioned, we want to use this ID, this UID that we use for authenticating the user as a document name. So we can link our documents to the authenticated user later on. So we can get the ID, as you've already seen, by saying usercred.user.uid, like so. And now we need to store the data that we want to store within this given or within this referenced location. So await set doc, which is again a function provided by Firebase, Firestore. So let's import that one. And this one expects the path as a first argument, so the reference, which is going to be our reference. That references the location where we want to store our data. And as a second argument, we need to define the data within an object. And I want to store our email. And now I could, of course, say email:\email. So this is the name inside of our database, and this is the variable name. But if key and value are the exact same, in modern JavaScript, you can just remove the value like so. And now we can just say, let's store email, let's store username, and maybe I also want to store created at, so the time of creation. And we can use server timestamp from Firebase Firestore again to create a timestamp for creation in our case. And now let's try to register again. So right here, let me just use a random email. So test@mail.com, npc codes, and password is npc whatever. I submitted that one. So actually now we have test@mail.com. So authentication worked. We created this user with this user ID. And now just remember this user ID. And let's go to Firestore database. And as you can see, we now have the users collection. We have one users document within this collection that has the exact same document name as UID previously. And within this field, we have the created at field, email, and username. So all of this works. And now we can link a user within this users collection by just using the document name and using the user ID. So we can link authenticated and stored users. And that will be important later on. But for now, let's also create a login for the user. So let's just go to login.jsx. And right here, this works pretty similar, I would say. First of all, let's check if we do not have an email or we do not have a password. If that is the case, then we're just going to return. So we'll not execute anything else. Otherwise, we're going to await sign in with email and password from Firebase/auth. This one again, expect our auth instance like so, and email and password. And again, we're using await, so we need to say async right here as well. And now, of course, since we're working with a database, there can also occur an error. So I'm just going to say try catch, and within the catch block, I'm just going to console.log the error like so. So now this works. But now we also need to check whether our user is logged in. And ideally, we should do so within the entire app, because every single page needs to check whether the user is logged in. For example, if the user is logged in, then we want to restrict the user from accessing the login and the register page, because why should a user who is already logged in register or log in again? That doesn't really make sense. And the other way around, if a user is not logged in, then why should the user be able to access the home, profile, or add post page? That doesn't really make too much sense as well. So our entire app needs to have access to this user. And in order to do so, we can use context combined with a provider. So I'm going to create a new folder that will store our context. And inside of this context, I'm going to create auth context.jsx. First of all, we need to create the context. So I'm going to say const auth context is going to be equal to create context. I'm going to initialize this create context hook with null. So by default, we do not have a context. Now I'm going to create a component. So const auth provider is going to be equal to an arrow function like so. We're just going to return a component that has the name auth context.provider. So we're just going to return a provider. We are going to expect children right here, and we're just going to use children right here. So we'll essentially just output all of the children within this auth context provider, and every single child within this provider has now access to whatever we provide within this value field right here. And we will now just pass an empty object for now, and we should be good to go. So now, what are the children? At the moment, there do not exist any children at all because we did not use this provider to wrap anything within it. But now we can just go to our main.jsx and essentially wrap this entire router provider with our auth provider. And now this entire router provider, so every single route will have access to our auth provider and therefore to our authentication state. So auth provider. Actually, I need to export that one before using that one. So export default auth provider like so. And now I should be able to import that one. So auth provider like so. And within this provider, I'm going to pass another provider essentially. So the router provider. So now this router provider provides all of the routes, and this auth provider should provide the login status of the user later on. So we'll get to that now. So let's first of all get the user by using a use effect hook. So once we load the app essentially, we're going to fetch the login status. But actually we are going to use a listener because we also want to listen to auth state changes. So if the user logs out, for example, we automatically want to update the status of the user. So we're going to use the user fact hook. We're going to create const unsubscribe. So this function right here, which is going to be equal to on auth state changed, which will be provided by Firebase/auth. And that one is a Firebase method that allows us to create a listener. And this listener will always listen to changes regarding the status of the logged in user or the user who is probably not logged in. So to the user who is currently using the website. This is a method that expects our auth object again. So we need to import that one and a next observer. And this next observer will keep track of the current user. So we will always get the current user right here. And then we can use a callback function. And for now, let me just console.log the current user like so. And after using the unsubscribe function, so after we've created our listener, we should immediately unsubscribe from that one. So we should return unsubscribe like so, because otherwise this might result in a couple of bugs and we might create a lot of listeners, which is obviously not what we want. We only want to have one single listener and afterwards we want to unsubscribe and therefore avoid creating a couple more listeners. And actually we need to remove the brackets here. This was my bad. So now let's take a look at our page. And as you can see, we're getting, let me reload. We're getting this information right here. So this is the current user that is logged in. So here's the email test@mail.com and so on, and this UID. So now we can access current user.uid, for example. Let me show you. Let me reload the page and we're getting our current user.user_ID right here. So if we have a user, we are getting this user ID. Otherwise, we are not getting anything in this case. So let's first of all check if we have a current user. If that is the case, then we want to do something. And otherwise, we want to do something else. If we have a user, of course, we maybe want to get the data from the database regarding the user. And otherwise, we want to set our user to null. So if user is null, then the user is currently not logged in. If user stores the user data, then he obviously is logged in. So we can store the user in a state. So const user set user is equal to use state. By default, this is going to be null because by default, the user is not logged in. And if we do not have a current user, then we want to set user to null again, because then of course we do not have a user and null makes sense. If we do have a current user though, then we also have current user.uid and we can use this UID to fetch the user from our database. So we can use the UID to just access this user within our Firestore database right here. So let's say const user ref is going to be equal to doc, so to a document within our collection. This document is within our database, within the users collection, and the ID or the document name to be precise. So this name right here is equal to current user.uid, so to the user ID from authentication. And now we can say const user or fetched user is going to be equal to await getDoc, again a method provided by Firebase/Firestore. And since we are using await right here, this here needs to be asynchronous because again this request takes a little bit of time. As a first argument, we need to pass our user ref like so, and this is actually enough. And for now, let me just console.log the fetched user for you so you really understand what is going on. So let me reload the page and you can see we're getting this user right here. And this one has an ID and a lot more. So to access the data right now, we can use fetched user.data, for example. So this is a method that we can call that will extract the data right here. Let me reload. And now you will see that we're getting the data right here. So we're getting created at email and username. So we can now store all of this data within our user right here. So I'm going to say set user. Let's store all of the data within an object. And now let's just destructure ... fetched user. So we want to get all of the properties, so key value pairs within this user. So created at email and username. But I also want to add the ID. So I'm going to say ID : and we can get the ID by saying fetched user.id, which will also return the ID. Now let's save that one. So now we are going to save all of the data instead of this user state variable if we have a user, and otherwise user is going to be null. And now we can just pass this user as a value right here. And now we can use this user pretty much anywhere. So let me show you. on the register page, for example, I could say const, I'm going to destructure, so I'm going to use object destructuring for user, which is going to be equal to use context. I'm going to need the auth context, so I also need to export the context to have access to it. So export const auth context. And now I'm just going to access auth context like so. Let me save. And now let's also console.log the user right here. Let me take a look at auth context. So I'm just going to remove that one so we're not going to be confused. So if we're now going to get a console.log of our user, this is definitely from here. And let me add from register so we are certain. And now you can see once I'm going to reload, we're getting from register this user object right here. And actually this looks a little bit weird, and the reason for this is that we made a little mistake. So we're just destructuring fetched user, but we need to destructure fetched user.data like so. So the data. Now you can see that we're getting this object right here that includes created at, email, ID, and username. So all of the necessary data. And to be fair, we don't really need any data from the user within our register page. But now we could, for example, say if we have a user, then we want to navigate to a different page. And actually, this is not the way that we are going to do it. We will create a public route and a protected route. And the public route essentially will allow every single user to access the register and login page who is currently not logged in. And the protected route will allow every single user who is currently logged in to access our home page and so on. So let's create a folder, routes for example. And inside of this folder, I'm going to create protected route.jsx, and I'm going to create public route.jsx. Let's say const public route is going to be equal to this arrow function. I'm going to export default public route, and actually this here is just going to be a wrapper, so I'll have a div, and inside of this div I'm just going to render the children. So we will use this public route as a wrapper, and whatever is wrapped within this public route will be affected. So I'm going to get children right here. Let me save that one. And right here, now I need to get the user status. So const user is equal to use context. I want to access the auth context. Now let me just console.log the user right here. And now let's wrap one of our public routes with this public route right here. What is a public route and where do we need to wrap it? We are providing all of our routes right here. So we need to wrap one of those elements with our public route. So public route, let me import that one from ./routes/public route. And within this public route, we're just going to pass our register route like so. And now this register route will be affected by this public route. So now let's take a look. You can see if I'm going to reload this page, we're getting this user right here. So currently we are actually logged in because we're getting this user. So we should also, in this case, not really render the children because the user is currently logged in. Doesn't really make sense to render the children. So I'm going to check whether we have a user. If we have a user, then we want to navigate to a different route. And only if we do not have a user, only then we want to display the children. So I'm going to use navigate from React Router DOM. I'm going to import that one. And I'm going to go to / and that's actually it. So to our home page. In case we have a user, we are going to navigate to / so to our home page. In case we do not have a user, then we're just going to render the children. Since our child, in this case, let me show you, is our register route right here. We will render the register route if we do not have a user, and otherwise we will redirect to the home page. So you can see we are getting redirected to the home page. And even if I'm going to try to access register right now, you can see we're immediately getting redirected to the homepage once the app realizes, so once the user is loaded, that the user is actually currently logged in. And if you want to create a professional app, of course, you could add loading status and so on, but in our case, this is okay. And now we want to do the exact same for login, and this is now pretty simple. So we can just use the public route again for our login page. So we just wrap this login component with our public route as well. And now if I'm going to try to access our login route, we are going to get redirected to the home page as well. And now we need to do the exact opposite for our protected routes, because our protected routes should obviously only grant access to the page if the user is currently logged in. So const protected route is going to be equal. we're going to get children as well right here. To this arrow function, we're going to return a div, export default protected route like so. And within this div, I now want to check whether I have a user or not. So I need to get this user. So const user is equal to use context. I want to get the auth context that stores our user status. If I have a user, then I want to render the children, and otherwise I want to use navigate like so. And I want to navigate to /register, for example. So to the register page like so. So now we can just use this protected route for every single route within our main.jsx that should be protected essentially. So protected route, obviously profile makes only sense if the user is currently logged in. Same goes for add post. So it only makes sense for a user who's currently logged in to also add a post. And the same of course goes for our homepage. So we only want to display posts to persons who are currently logged in. Now let's start by creating our navigation bar. So let's go to components, navbar.jsx, and let's just render or output this component on every single one of our pages. So right here, let's import nav bar. Actually, we first need to create that one. So const nav bar is going to be equal to this arrow function that is just going to return an empty div for now. Export default navbar. Let's save that one. And now let's import the navbar right here. Let's also add that one for our homepage. So navbar right here. And for our profile page. And our register and login page do not need this navbar right here. So now let's go to our navbar and let's also use or create a style sheet for that navbar. So navbar.module.css. And we're going to import styles from /css/navbar.module.css. Right here, I want to have a logo on the top, and right below I want to have a couple of nav items. Every single item will be inside of a div, for example, and I want to have an icon to the left and some text to the right. And actually, let's replace this div with a link from React Router DOM. Like so, and let's say the first link points to our homepage, so to /. Now we need to get icons from React icons, so let's search for React icons like so. We're going to go to the first link to take a look at a couple of icons. We want to have an icon for our homepage, so I'm just going to select FA home, for example. Let me import that one, and let me output that one right within this link. And next to this link, I want to have a paragraph that says home, for example, like this. So let's take a look at the page. We're getting this error because we do not have React icons installed yet. So I'm going to say npm I react -icons. I'm going to wait for the installation to finish. And as you can see, now we're getting this effect right here. So logo, and then this icon, and the nav link home. So let me just give this entire link a class name of styles.link container, for example. Let me copy that link container. .link container will have a display of flags, align items of center, and a gap of maybe 20 pixels. Let me save that one. So this is the effect. Now I also need to target this paragraph. So class name styles.link text, and let's target .link text. Text decoration none. Font weight is going to be bold. Color is going to be var of -- primary minus color. Let's save that one again. We're having this effect right here. And actually we need to add this text decoration to this link container right here. So now this should actually work. And as you can see, it does. I also need to target the icon. So I give that one a class name of styles.icon. I'm going to target .icon. And I'm going to say that .icon will have a font size of maybe 1.4 rem. So it's a little bit bigger. Like this. And maybe I'm even going to use 1.6 and a color of var of primary color as well. So this is the effect that we're looking for. Also, I think that this one could have a little bit more font size. So font size of 1.2 rem, for example. Gonna save that one, and that's the effect. And actually, I'm going to use a normal font weight for this one. So that was my bad. For the size, I'm going to use 1.1 rem, and I think this is fine. So now I can just copy this link a couple of times, like so. So now this is the effect, but maybe for the second one, we want to have add post, and for the third one, I want to have profile. And actually I could turn all of those links into components, so I would only have to create one component and reuse this here multiple times. Would probably be a little bit smarter, but I'm just going to keep it like this, because for this project it's just a little bit faster. So this is the effect that we're having right now, but I also need to have different icons, or I want to have this different icons. So I'm going to search for add, for example. I'm just going to grab this plus button right here. So I'm going to import it, copy the component, and for the second one, I'm going to replace that one with this new icon. So md add. And for the third one, let me get a profile icon. So let's search for profile, or actually user might make a little more sense. And then let's just use this user right here. So I'm going to import that one as well. And let me get FA user as well and replace FA home right here. And now this should be kind of right. So let's go to our app, and this is what this looks like. Let me also target our logo. So this one will have a class name of styles.logo. .logo will have a font weight of bold and a font size of 2.5 rem, like this. So this is the effect that we're looking for. Color might also be our primary color. Now let me give this entire navbar a container as well. So this entire one right here will have a class name of styles.container. And I'm going to give this entire container, so .container, heading top, bottom, left, right of maybe let's try 30 pixels like this. And let's maybe even go for 40 pixels. And now I'm going to use a border minus right 1 pixel solid RGBA 0.4, so some form of gray. And actually I want to use border right, not border radius. And you can see that we're getting this effect right here, so the border looks pretty weird. So for this entire container, I'm also going to say width is going to be fit content. So now we're getting this effect. And I want to have a height of 100%, but a min height of 100 viewport height. So it takes up the entire width right here. And actually, I think 0.1 is a lot better. So this is a good effect. So now top, bottom, left, right is 40 pixels at the moment, but let's just use 40 for the top. Let's use 100 pixels right. Bottom doesn't really matter, but let's use 40 pixels and left 40 pixels, like so. Now I also want to give some styling to this container that includes all of the links. So I'm going to go to this div right here. This is going to have styles.navbar. Let me copy .navbar. This will have a display of flex, but a flex direction of column and a gap between the items of 25 pixels, for example. So now we're having a little bit of spacing, which looks a lot better. And I want to have margin top of maybe 80 pixels as well. So now I think this looks a lot better. Maybe 80 is a little bit too much, so let's go with 60 pixels. And I think this looks pretty nice. Actually, I also need to add minus post right here, and this here needs to link our profile page. And now I can go to add post, and I can go to profile. Next up, let's create a logout button that is going to be super minimalistic for now, but we can at least check whether our login system works. So let's create a button. Log out, and actually I'm just going to use the button that we've already created, so I'm just going to import that one. So button, like so. This one expects a couple of different props, so text and on click. Text is going to be equal to log out, for example, and on click I'm going to pass handle logout. We don't have this function yet, so const handle logout is going to be equal to this arrow function right here. And logging a user out is really easy. First of all, we need a try catch block, because of course, if we are working with a database, there can occur an error. And the thing that we want to try is going to be sign out. And we need to import that one from Firebase /auth. And we need to pass our auth object right here. Auto import does not seem to work, so we need to import that manually. So import sign out from Firebase /auth. And import auth from ... Firebase. Let's save that one. This function here needs to be asynchronous because we're again working with the database. Now let me go to profile, and you can see we're getting this effect right here. And for now, this doesn't matter. We'll fix that in a second. So let's just go ahead and log out. And as you can see, we're getting redirected to this page because now our user does not exist anymore. We can create a new user. So this is going to be npcwappy@gmail.com. Username is going to be npc, and password is going to be npc123. So let me save that email for later on. Once I'm going to log in, once again, I'm going to press register. We're getting redirected to this page. Now I can go to profile. Let me press log out. Let me go to login to test the login. And I'm going to use npc123 as a password. Let me log in. And you can see it all seems to work. We can log in, log out, and register. So now this button right here looks pretty weird, but again, we'll fix it in a second. For now, let's give our user the opportunity to add a new post. Let's just close all of those tabs and let's only keep add post open because that was the only one that we need for the moment. I want to have a div that wraps our entire form. And inside of this div, I want to have an h1 that says add post, for example. Right below, I want to have a label that one says title, for example. And right below this title, I want to have an input field. I can use the input field that we've created already. So this one right here. I just need to import that one from ./components like so. And now this input fields, if you take a look at this, expects a type, a placeholder, a value, and onChange. So type is going to be equal to text, placeholder is going to be title, value, and set value. And we need to define those ones. So const title set title is going to be equal to use state. We'll initialize with an empty value. And now we'll pass title right here and set title right here as well. But I would also like to have an ID for this one that is going to be equal to title in our case, because I want to link this input field to this label right here, so title. So now I can also accept an ID right here, and I can say that the ID for this input is going to be equal to the ID that we've gotten via props right here. Let me save that. And you can see that now on our add post page, we're having this input field, but it looks pretty weird. Again, we'll fix that later. Next up, we want to get a text area. So let me get that one by creating a new component. So text area.jsx const, actually this needs to be JSX. So rename JSX const text area. It's going to be equal to that one. We're going to return a text area like so, and export default text area. Now again, let me also give that one an ID. We're going to expect this ID as a prop. So ID is going to be equal to the ID prop that we're getting right here. We're going to have a placeholder that is going to be equal to a placeholder that we're also expecting to get via props. Now we need a value and a set value as well. Our value is going to be equal to the value that we get via props. And on change, we're getting an event, and we want to set our value to e.target.value, like so. I'm also just going to use the same style sheet that I've used for my input field, because I think those ones are pretty similar and it does not really make sense to create a new module for that one. So instead of our input.module.css, I'm going to create a text area, so the class text area to be precise. So let's go to input.module.css. Text area. I'm just going to copy all of those styles. I'm just going to add, so this here needs to be width, and I'm just going to add a height of 180 pixels right here. And I'm going to set resize to none, so this is not resizable anymore. So now I can just add the text area right below. So I need to import that one as well. And that one should have pretty similar attributes right here, or props to be precise. And this is going to be responsible for the post. We don't have value, etc. yet, so I'm just going to create them in a second. But we also need a label for, and we can say that this one is for the post, for example. Or this here can be a message. And maybe ID is also a message, and then I'm going to say this here has HTML for message. Then I'm going to say the label has post message as a text. and we're getting this effect right here. And actually I think I'm only going to use 120 pixels, and I think this is more than enough. And actually right below I also want to have a button, so I'm going to import the button right here. Like, somehow does not seem to display the button for me, so I need to import that one manually. Sometimes it's really buggy, to be honest, the code editor. So I'm going to import button from /components/button like this. And now our button will need text and on click. So we're going to add text. This will say create post, and on click I want to add handle create post as a function. We don't have this function yet, so let's create that one. So const handle create post is going to be equal to an arrow function for now. And we also need to connect this text area to our state. So we need to create a message state, for example. So const message set message is going to be equal to use state, and we're going to initialize with an empty string. And now we're going to replace this title value with our message value and set message right here. Let's take a look at the page. It still looks the same, but it should now work. We added this button right here. Now I want to create one component that instead of just having the logout button, includes the logout button, includes the username, and maybe includes a small profile icon. So something similar to Instagram, and you'll see in a second. So let's go ahead and create this component. So the component can maybe have the name logoutModal.jsx const logoutModal is going to be equal to an arrow function. We're going to return a div for now, and I'm going to export default logout modal like so. And now I want to display this component on every single page. That allows the user essentially to press the logout button on every single page. So I'm going to say within our pages folder, so add post for example, that I want to add right below this div for example, our logout modal like so. So I'm going to import that one. And now the same for our home page and the same for our profile page. So logout modal, let's import that one, and profile will get a logout modal as well, like so. And actually I'm just going to remove the button right here. And I also think that we can take the handle logout function right here and can just move that one over to our logout modal, because we will have to use the logout function right here. So I'm going to take that one. I'm also going to take the imports, I'm going to remove them right here, and I'll replace, or I'll add the imports right here. And for the profile component, I can also remove that button import. And now if we take a look at our pages, we should have this logout component, but we do not have anything there yet, so it doesn't matter too much. So let's go to React icons again and take a look at the icons and search for a user icon. Or actually, I think we have one already, but let's search for user. Let's again use FA user, for example. We need to import that one. So let's import FA user, and let's also use that one as a component right here. And now I want to have the user to the left, and I want to have username and the logout button to the right. So right here, I'm going to create another div, and inside of this div, I'm going to have a paragraph, for example. Or actually, I'm going to use a link for that one. So I'm going to use a link right here from React Router DOM. And inside of this link, I want to use the username. To get the username, I need to load the user. So const user is going to be equal to use context. We need to get access to the auth context. And I think auth context was the name, but let me take a look because it does not recognize that one right here. Let's search for context right here, auth context, export auth context. So that one should actually work. So why doesn't it recognize that one? Okay, now it does. So auth context like so. And now I want to display within this link user.username. I think it should be username, to be fair. Let's take a look at our app. And as you can see, we're getting the username right here. And at the moment, I am puzzled because that was the account I've created previously. And now I also want to add a logout button. And actually, I'm going to keep that one pretty simple. I'm just going to use a normal button. And I think this button will be pretty unique. So this will be the only button that will look like this. So I'm not going to turn that one into a component. So this one will say logout, for example. And now we have this button. And of course, on click, we need to log the user out. So on click handle logout. And now the logout button should work. And now let's also add styling. So we need to create a style sheet first. So logout modal, logout module.css. Let's go to logout modal and import styles from /css/logout module.module.css. And right here, I'm going to use a class name of styles.container. And right here, I'm going to use a class name of styles.writeContainer, for example. So let me style that one. So .container will have a display of flex. So I want to have the user icon to the left, and I want to have username and logout button to the right. Now for the next container, so this write container, I also want to use a display of flex, but I want to use a flex direction of column because I want those items to be sitting below each other like this. Now I want to have a little bit of gap between those items. So I'm going to say that the gap right here is going to be 20 pixels. Now we have this effect. I want to align the items to flex start. So they're all starting at the top right here. I also want to have a gap of maybe 7 pixels between the items inside of the write container. And now let's also style the link. So class name styles.link and class name styles.logoutbtn. Let me copy that one. We're going to target .link, text decoration none, font weight bold, font size 1.1 rem, and .logout button background none, border 0, color RGBA 0000.9, for example. Let's test that one. Let me save this one. And we're getting this effect right here. And of course, the cursor should be a pointer for the button. So it looks clickable, as you can see. And actually, I'm going to use 0.7, for example. And for the link, I'll use a color of var. And let's take a look at our index.css. And I want to use the primary color, for example. So var -- primary color. Let's take a look at the page. So we're getting this page, and I also would like to have an @ sign. So @ right here before the username. And now we're getting this effect. And actually, instead of using align items flex start, I'm going to use center. So they're centered like this. And I'm going to use 15 pixels. And of course, you can keep styling this a lot, but I think this here is kind of alright. And now for me, this here is actually alright. So I'm just going to keep it like this. But I want to make the link work. So I need to say that this link here will redirect the user to /profile. So to the profile page. So once you click on this button right here, you will get redirected to the profile page. If you take a look right here at the URL, we're always getting redirected to the profile page. And once I click logout, we're getting logged out. And now I can create cool user at gmail.com, cool user ayo, password, let's use some random stuff, doesn't matter too much. And once we are logging in, you can see that we're getting @cooluser.io. And this here looks pretty weird, so we should also fix that one. But it's good that we see this right now. So write container should have align items of flex start, like so. And now you can see this works. And now I want those items sitting next to each other. So this one should be here to the right, and this here should be to the left. So let's do that one. So in order to do so, we could go to our homepage, for example, so to our home style sheet and to our homepage. So first of all, let's take a look, home.jsx. We need a class name right here, and we need a style sheet. So we can say home.module.css. Let's create .container display of flex. Let's go to our homepage and import styles from ./css/home.module.css. And this one here will get the class name of styles.container. So now we should have display of flex. So you see this works. And I want to use justify content space between. So we have a pretty big gap right here. And I want to use align items of flex start. So now this here should be aligned to the top. But of course, it would be pretty cool if we would have a little bit more space right here and maybe a border to the left as well. So I'm going to use a wrapper container for the logout model, so div. And I'm going to say this here is a class name of styles.modal container. Let me save, or let me take that one and paste it in here. And now I'm going to say that I want to have padding of maybe 40 pixels to the top. Or let me actually use 60 pixels top, 60 pixels right. Bottom doesn't really matter. And let's maybe use 100 pixels to the left. And now I also want to use a border left of 1 pixel, solid. And let me actually take a look at our nav bar, because I think we have a border for the nav bar already. So I'm going to copy that one. I want to use the exact same color. And I'm going to paste that one in here, but I'm going to, do it like this. So now we're having this effect. And of course, for the container, we should maybe also say that the height is going to be 100%, but the min height is going to be 100 viewport height. So it takes up all of the available height. And maybe we have a little bit too much space to the left, to be honest. So I'm just going to use 60 right here as well. And I think this looks pretty good already. So you can get to the profile page, and you can also log out if you wanted to. But now let's also create a profile page and a post page where we use the same styles. So let's go to our add post page, and I think we don't have a style sheet there yet as well. So yeah, I need to create one. So I'm going to say add post.module.css, and let's also create profile.module.css. And now let's go to our home page. Let's just copy those classes. Let's paste them in here. And same goes for add post module.css. So let's add them in there as well. And now for the pages, all we really have to do is import styles. So import styles from ./css/profile.module.css, and right here for our add posts page, where is it? Add post, import styles from ./css/add post module.css. And now for this container, again, we need to use class name of styles.container, and we need to create a container for our logout modal. So div logout modal, and this one will have class name of styles. And I think the class name was modal container, so let's use class name modal container. And now we can do the exact same for our profile page. So right here, I'm also going to say class name styles.container, and for this div, I'll say class name styles.modal container, like this. So let's save this one. And now you can see this works, and we have the exact same effect on every single page. And I think this here looks also a lot better already, but we also need to add styling to that one right now. And I would really like to have this one centered right here. So how can we do that? And that's of course pretty easy. So let's just first of all close all of the other areas right here, because they're pretty distracting, and all we really need at this point is the add post area. And we have this right here, so this div right here. So let's just use a wrapper div essentially for this div. So let me take that one. Div, instead of this div, we have all of those items, and now I'm going to say class name styles.form container, for example. Now I'm going to copy form container, and I also need the add post CSS file. I'm going to target form container, display flex, justify content center, align items center. So now we're taking whatever we have within this container, and also I need to use a height of 100%. And actually I need to use viewport height. So I'm going to use height of 100%, but a min height of 100 viewport height to really center this. So now this works. You can see we have the centered add post section. Now we have this form subcontainer, so I'm just going to use styles.form subcontainer. Of course, you can also use a more descriptive name, but for this tutorial, I think this works. And now I want to center everything within this container. I want to add some gaps and so on. So again, display flex. Flex direction is going to be column. For the width, I'm going to use 100%. For this width, I'm also going to use 100%. And now you can see this takes up all of the available space. And I want this to take up all of the available space, but I also want to have a max width, so max width of 400 pixels. So it should take up all of the available space. And actually, I think 90% is a little bit better. So a max, so width 90%, and max width 400 pixels. So on small devices, this will take up 90% of the available width, but on big devices, it will take up a max of 400 pixels. But maybe I'm going to add a gap of 5 pixels for now. And now let's start to style the individual parts. So let's start to give our h1 a class name of styles.heading, for example. Let me target .heading. That one will have a color of var of dash dash primary minus color. Text align of center, so let's take a look at that one. A margin bottom of 40 pixels, for example. And let's also add a little text right below. So maybe a paragraph right below this heading that says, feel free to share your thoughts, like this. Now we're having this text right here, and I'm also going to use a class name of styles.subheading. I'm going to target .subheading, and actually I'm going to give a margin bottom of 30 pixels to that one and a margin bottom of maybe 5 pixels to that one. For this one I'm going to use a color of RGBA 0000.6. So we have a form of gray, and I'm going to say text align center. And I'm actually going to remove the margin bottom because I think there's enough margin by default already. So we have this effect. And now for the create post button, I'll also use a little more margin. So I'm just going to go to this button. I wrap it within a div, and I'm going to say that this div will have a class name of styles.buttonContainer. And button container will have an additional margin top of maybe 10 pixels. So we just have a little more margin there. And I also think that there should be a little more margin. And actually, I'm also probably going to remove the labels, even though it was a little bit of effort to add them. I mean, now you know how this works, but they actually look terrible. So I think this works. So now the user can essentially add a post, but we also need to add the Firebase functionality. And in order to do so, we also want to create a posts collection. And this works pretty similar to the users collection, so I'm going to go over that a little bit faster. Of course, we need this handle create post function. We're going to try something, and if this does not work, and it of course can always not work because we're working with a database and there can always occur an error. And if that is the case, then we're just going to console.log the error. Otherwise, if everything works, then we're first going to define the reference to our collection. So const posts ref is going to be equal to collection. We're going to reference a collection in this case because we want to add a document to a collection, but we do not need to define a specific ID for the document. So Firebase can automatically generate the ID for our document. And since we do not define the document name right here, we only need to define a reference to the collection and not to the specific document. This document will be stored within our database, so DB, and the name is going to be posts, so the collection name will be posts. Now we're going to await add doc, like so. The reference is posts ref, and the data is just going to be our title and our message. So title, message, and actually I also need to store the user ID. So I'm also going to say comma user ID, and user ID is equal to user.id. And actually we need the user, so const user is equal to use context auth context, like this. And since we are awaiting add doc, we also need to use async right here. And now I also want to have created add, and I'm going to use server timestamp right here once again to create a timestamp for the creation date. And actually, if I'm not wrong, this should already do the job. So let's try this. So instead of this app, let's say, hello guys, this is a title. This is the first message that I wrote within this app, yuppie. Like so, create post. Let's take a look at our app or at our database. And actually you see we created the post collection, and inside of this post collection we have created add, we have a message, a title, and a user ID. And this user ID reference our current user, so the user who's currently logged in. So let's take a look, and you can see that the user ID right here that we have for, let's take a look, cooluser@gmail.com. So that user ID is equal to the user ID that we stored right here. So that one is the exact same one. Next up, within our homepage, I would like to display all of the posts. So I first, of course, have to load all of the posts, and then I have to display all of the posts. So let's just do that. So homepage, we can use useEffect. So use effect, whenever we render this component, we will call useEffect and therefore fetch all of the posts. So whenever the user navigates to this page, we will fetch all of the posts. We're going to define a function, let's say const fetch posts. It's going to be equal to this function right here. We're going to try catch console.log error in case we get an error. And if we do not get an error, we of course first need to get the reference again to our collection. Our collection right here, our user's post collection in this case, includes all of the posts. So we need to get a reference to that collection. So const posts ref is going to be equal to collection. We need to import that one, db, and post. So the post collection within our database. Const post docs is going to be equal to await get docs. So we need to use get docs because we're getting multiple documents. Since we're awaiting that, this function needs to be asynchronous. And now we need to pass our posts ref within this get docs call. So let's save this one. And right below, let's just console.log post docs for now, so you really understand how this looks. And actually, I also need to fetch the posts so we can see something. So let me do that again. Let me reload. And you can see that we're getting the documents right here. So we're getting this query snapshot. And to really see the documents now, we can do postdocs.docs, which will display all of the docs to us. So let me go to the home page. So you see we are getting this query snapshot that includes all of the documents as an array. So if I'm going to access 0, for example, I should get the specific snapshot. Okay, now it took a little bit, but you see we're getting the snapshot right here. That now should include all of the data if I'm going to access that one by using .data, so the data method. And now if I'm going to reload, I should see all of the documents right here, or all of the data for this single individual document to be precise, because we're only accessing this document. And of course, now I can map over those documents, so over every single one, and extract the data and store the data in an array, for example. So I could say const post docs or posts, for example, is going to be equal to post docs dot docs. So this is an array dot maps. We need to map over the entire array. And for every single iteration, we're going to get one single document from this array. And now by using doc.data, for example, we could get the data for every single document. So what we're going to return right here, we're just going to return an object. And inside of this object, we're going to have doc.data. So we're going to spread all of the data within this object. And I'm going to add an ID that is equal to doc.id. So to the ID of the specific document. And now again, let me console.log all of the posts for you, like this. And let me remove this line. And now, if I'm going to reload this, you can see that we're getting this array that includes one document at the moment that has created add ID, message, title, and the user ID. And if I'm going to add a second document, so hey guys, second message, you. Then I'm going to create the post. And actually, we should also reset that one. So let me do that very quick. So add post. Once we submitted all of this, I would like to set title to an empty title and set message to an empty message like this. And let's just say third message. Hey guys, again, doesn't matter. Create post. And you can see we're resetting the title and the message. So now let's go to our home page. And now we should essentially have 3 items within our array because we now have 3 posts within our database. And right here, now we can get all of the posts and store them within a state. So const posts set post is going to be equal to use state. We're going to initialize the state with an empty array. And now instead of console.logging those posts, we can also just say set posts. And we're going to set the posts equal to the posts that we have right here. So to this posts. And now we could just use a map method, for example, right here within a div, for example, to output all of the posts. So we could just say posts.map for every single post. We're just going to return a div that, for example, like this, displays post dot what do we have within post. Let's take a look. We have the title, for example, so post.title, and that could be it. Let me reload the page. And now you can see we're getting all of the posts right here. But now, of course, it might make sense to create a post component that we can just display over there. So I'm going to do that. So let's go to our components, post component or post.jsx, const post is going to be equal to this function, export default post. What are we going to expect? We're going to expect a title and what was the second thing? A message, I think. Let's take a look. Actually, I'm not even seeing the post anymore, so maybe we should log the post right here so we really see what is going on. So right here, console.log posts, like this. And you can see we're getting this array that includes for every single post a message, a title, and so on. So let's just do that. Title and message are probably pretty important. And for now, let's say this here is fine. Now we're just going to return a div. Within this div, we'll have a paragraph that includes the title of the post. And let's say we are having a second paragraph that includes the message, for example. And right before the title, we're just going to use an @ symbol. Let's also create a style sheet. So post.module.css. And let's just import that one for now. So import styles from /css/post module.css. And now this here can have a class name of styles.container, class name of styles.title, and class name of styles.message. So .container, .title, .message, and for .container, let's say that one has a width of 100%, text align left, so all of the children inherit that, and title will have a font weight of bold, font size of 1.4 rem, and a color of var primary color. Now for the message, let me just keep that one empty for now, and we'll see whether we have to fix that later on or not. And now I'm just going to output right here a post within this div, for example. So post like so, like this. So let's save this one. Now you can see we're getting this effect right here. But we also need to pass the title to every single post. So we need to say title is going to be equal to post.title. And we also need to say message is going to be equal to post.message, like so. So now this should be the desired effect, and you can see this looks a lot better already in my opinion. And now let's style that one within our homepage as well. So let's say this div has a class name of styles.postContainer, and this here has a class name of styles.post, for example. Or let's say this one is post container and this one is post container. That's probably a little more descriptive. And this one also needs a key prop. So key is going to be equal to post.id. And I think the ID should be unique, right? So we have this ID field, yeah, and this ID is the post ID or the post ID. So this one is definitely unique, and we can use that one as a key for our div within our map method. And now let's style those ones within our home.module.css. So home.module.css.post container. I want to have a margin top of maybe 100 pixels first of all, like this. Now I want to have display of flex, but I want to use a flex direction of column, of course. So flex direction column, and I want to have a gap of maybe 30 pixels between the individual items, like this, or maybe 20 is enough. So this should work. And I want this to take up 100% of the available width. And I want to have a padding left of maybe 40 pixels. So we have a little bit of padding. Maybe I'm going to use 70. So I think this looks pretty much all right in my opinion. Let me log out again. I'm going to create a random user at web.de npc and whatever, doesn't matter. So let's register. And this is what this looks like. And actually I'm going to remove the width of 100% because this somehow breaks the layout. And I'm just going to use right here for the post container text align of left. Align items of flex start. And actually I'm going to use flex grow of 1. So this takes up all of the space. So now this works. Now it's actually pretty easy to finish this project. We just need to go to our profiles page and we need to actually add pretty similar styles to our homepage. And we also need to fetch the posts, but only the posts that belong to our user who's currently logged in. So let's go to the profiles page. Let's again create use effect or use the use effect hook right here. We're going to use an error function and an empty dependencies array. We're going to define const fetch posts again. This is going to be this function right here. We'll have a try catch block. We're going to console.log the error in case we have an error. And otherwise, we are going to define a reference to the location where we are searching for the posts. And again, this is the posts ref that is going to be equal to our collection. We are going to take a look at our database and at the posts collection. And now we need to use a query in order to query for the right document. So const q is going to be equal to query. We're going to import this query from Firebase, Firestore. And now this query as a first argument expects the reference, so posts ref. And as a second argument, it expects a condition. And we are going to use where. We need to import where, like so. And this is going to be a method. And inside of those brackets, we need to define what property we are going to compare. So let's take a look at our database. We're going to compare this user ID. So user ID. And we're going to check whether the user ID is going to be equal, so two equal signs, to user.id, so to the ID of the currently logged in user. So we first need to get the currently logged in user. So const user is equal to use context. We need to access auth context again. And now we're going to take a look at user.id like this. And this query will now return documents. And oftentimes you say that this has the name snapshots. So the documents have the name snapshot. And this is going to be equal to get docs, and we're going to get the docs that meet the criteria of our query. So like this. And now let's just console.log the snapshot so you really understand how this one works. And we also, of course, need to call fetch posts right here. And we should also, to the dependencies array, as our user like this. And of course, we need to wait get docs. And since we need to wait get docs, this is also an asynchronous function like this. So now let's go to the users page. So profile, let's inspect, and let's take a look at the console. So we're getting this query snapshot. Again, we can get the data by using snapshot.docs of 0, for example, .data like this. So let me show you. And right now, if I'm going to reload, we're getting the documents right here. This array thing, let me add a post so I really understand what is going on. So create posts. Let's go to profile, and we're getting this one right here. So yeah, we're getting this post right here as an object. And this post, of course, includes our message, title, our user ID, and so on. And now we can store all of those documents again within an array. So we can again say const user post is going to be equal to snapshot.docs.map. So we're going to map over every single document. For every single doc, we're getting the doc right here. And we're just going to return for every single one doc.data like this. And we're going to spread those properties right here. And we're also going to get the ID, so doc.id. So ID like, like this. So this should now work. And now we need to set the doc somewhere. So const posts set posts is going to be equal to use state. We're again going to initialize with an empty array. Now set posts is going to be equal to user posts like this. And now all we really have to do is we just have to go to our home page, and we can just copy this entire block, because again, we just have to display all of the posts right here in the middle. So let's save that one. I also need to import the post, for example. Let me save that. So this is the home page, and this is the profiles page. And now let's also just add the classes to our profiles page. So home.module.css. Let's go in there. We have this post container. Let's just copy all of the styles. Let's go to our profile module.css. Let's paste that in here. Let's save that one. And as you can see, we're getting this look right here. And now I think the last thing that I want to fix is that this here looks pretty terrible. So I'm going to go to our logout modal module. And now let's say padding to the right is going to be 120 pixels and to the left, let's just use 50, for example. Let's take a look at that. So this looks a lot better to me already. And I think to the left, we can actually even use less, so 40 maybe. And I think, yeah, this looks a lot better, especially since you have a longer username. So now I can also just copy that in to our profile module. So right here, let's replace that, and to our add post module. And of course, there are cleaner ways to achieve the exact same. Let me go to the modal container. And of course, yeah, and now this should all look the same. So home, add post, profile. And now you can, of course, also use created add and so on to, for example, order the posts by date, add a delete button and so on. But I'll leave all of this up to you because I think by doing this app, you definitely understood how all of this works, how Firebase works, how to do all of those things. And now it's just practicing a little bit and you should definitely be able to do all of this, and sorting and so on is just plain JavaScript anyways. I really hope you learned something within this tutorial and had a lot of fun. And yeah, otherwise I hope you have a great day, enjoy your time, and see you guys.